was discussing quite intensely, so that's good. Now the second phase of our block on political ecology. We'll have a presentation by Ajahn Chusak, contextualizing it all more in northern Thailand. Then I'll say a few things about the connection between transdisciplinarity and political ecology. And then we'll have another hour or so in the small group discussions, okay?
Okay. During the group discussion, I only have opportunity to join one group, the group number 5, right, for the field trip. So I don't know what the rest of the group is discussing about. I have less than 20 minutes to discuss about basically how you do a political ecology in northern Thailand. My talk will be based on these two readings that I assume that you have read it. First one is come from a book. The title is like this, It's quite a controversial book when it came out because there's a lot of critics, a lot of response, especially from our colleagues here in social science, because they have been criticized somehow, from this book. And also the critic is coming from the scientists as well, so I would say that it's quite provocative when it came out, and probably that's the intention of the authors. So what's mentioned in this book is there's two kind of views on environmental problem in northern Thailand. One, it can be called as kind of pessimist view, the situation is so bad, Especially from, if you look at one of the book that has been mentioned, is A Land on Fire, that's kind of talking about the environmental degradation in northern Thailand. And the books also try to ask question why and how it would influence the environmental problems are defined in the way they ask. So this is about how we define problems. This may be a problem for this group of people, but it's not a problem for another group of people. And it's also mentioned that there's many popular description of environmental degradation, especially in northern Thailand, actually impede appropriate environmental management and sustainable development, because their popular knowledge or popular description of environmental problem is not based on empirical research, but it's more kind of belief. So this book aims to replace what is described as a simplistic idea with more biophysical nuance and politically representative understanding of environmental change in northern Thailand. So why environmental knowledge in northern Thailand is being politicized? We take into the context of northern Thailand in terms of geographies. Northern Thailand is comprised of the topography of highland and lowland. So this kind of highland-lowland relation context is really important to the way that the problem of environmental degradation has been framed. It's often present that northern Thailand is biophysical and rich, and and also that's important in terms of political context. In the past, during the Cold Wars, northern Thailand is a battleground of the Cold War. There's a movement of Communist Party of Thailand, armed movements, which their stronghold is in the forest. A lot of ethnic minority live in the highlands. A lot of problem involve drugs, narcotics, especially heroin. You probably know something about Golden Triangle. Is a part of this part of the northern Thailand as well. In terms of environmental significance, northern Thailand often viewed as a source of water supply and watershed for the downstream central Thailand. Issue of forest protection and biodiversity conservation is one of the crucial issues. And of course, agricultural mismanagement by ethnic minority is also one of the problems that has been researched and discussed. And lastly, ethnic conflicts, which also involve with the issue of environmental degradations. So the debate about environmental problem in northern Thailand is, it can be dichotomized into one group is kind of nature-oriented, people who are conservationists, talking about the rich biodiversity of northern Thailand. On the other hand, social scientists who are working with local ethnic minorities also have their views. We call people-oriented views. Internal management is also kind of dichotomized into a state and local. But in reality, I would say later that this is too simple to just kind of dichotomize. So the point here is that how the knowledge, environmental knowledge, has been produced, and how it entangled with a kind of politics and produce a kind of competing views. So this book tried to argue about the social and political context of environmental knowledge productions, or in other words, that environmental knowledge production is not neutral, it's not value-free. But the way we define the problem is also constrained by many factors, which the paper calls problem closures. The way that the problem is defined has been affected by other factors as well. And then many people look for alternative, like local knowledge as alternative. Every time when there is a conflict about resource management and environmental degradations, local knowledge often affiliated with, the farmer, forest user experience, the direct experience with nature, with the traditional communities, the participatories. And one example is that the case of the Karen people that lead to one of the authors has called a kind of current consensus, a kind of a belief that current is always, you know, kind of forest lover or something, you know, which that's also producing from a few social science research. But of course, this has been criticized as maybe it's too romanticized the commons or to romanticize the communities. So at the end, this chapter try to propose to look at what they call environmental narrative and how it linked to the politics of state makings. So referring to what Hager is mentioned about storylines, you know, or simply a discourse, how to explain environmental change, and also leading to how we build an effective governance. But of course, this involves many actors. It can lead to what they call discord coalitions. So what has been proposed in this is the production of environmental knowledge. It's both reflect and reinforce a social structure, and there's no separate between politics and knowledge. Political and social influence can be in the form of what I just mentioned of problem closure, the way we define problem. Or basically it's about power relation among different actors. So the further debate that left at the end of the chapter is how political interests and social process have reduced environmental complexity to simplify statements that do not necessarily assist in environmental management and which often have unfortunate social and political impacts. The knowledge production sometimes it simplifies the complexity of the situations. And the worst thing is that it affects both nature and people in the negative ways. For example, a common explanation that link upland agriculture with environmental degradation are overly simplistic and do not provide a sound basis for addressing the challenge of upland resource management. For example, they often talking about the drought or flood in the lowland caused by forest degradation by ethnic minorities living in upland or in highlands. And at the end, try to, the way that they try to divide good man and bad man, good guy and bad guys, in terms of forest guardian and forest destroyers, is really not useful and also socially unjust in terms of ethnic conflict and violence that I will mention later in the second papers. So this chapter provides a kind of scale down from what Khan has mentioned in terms of political ecologies and environmental knowledge productions in general in the global scale. But this kind of scale down to northern Thailand, we have seen this kind of a kind of simplistic description of elemental degradation that produce a kind of winner and losers in northern Thailand. My second case is it even more focused or scaled down to really specific incidents in northern Thailand in one province, in Nan. This is based on the paper with the same title like this. If you read this paper, I would pose this question to you: that does history matter and how the history matter? Does geography matters in terms of ethnic identification, or in terms of resource conflicts and ethnic violence? Why has forest become arena of resource conflicts? And how has ethnic identification been negotiated? So this is the big question that I try to answer in this question, in these papers. This is one province in the eastern part of northern Thailand called Nan. So its geography is like this. If you look at the first map, is slope map. And it also represents what it's like in northern Thailand as well. Chiang Mai or the province or the whole northern Thailand is basically it's mountainous, high slope, small valley with the stream or the rivers. And that also lead to a kind of agroecological zone that divide into roughly three types: lowlands, upland, and highlands. This is an argument in my paper that identification is shaped by history and geography of Lana or northern Thailand. And I also borrow some of the literature that has been written about this kind of ethnic identification. One of the famous one is by Dr. Thongchai Vinichakun. His paper on titled "The Author Within." He's talking about ethno-spatial classification, the way we divide people by using space, the place where they live. It's nothing to do with a kind of cultural attributes, language, or religion. It's just where you live. So this kind of larger geography of northern Thailand, valley and hill, really shape how ethnic identification has been made and negotiated in northern Thailand. And ultimately, when you look at particular resource conflict and violence, it can link to this kind of ethnic identification, linked to these geographies, linked to the history of northern Thailand in terms of a state. So the approach that I take, in fact, we do this in a kind of collection of papers. I was asked to write something on northern Thailand, so we kind of pair up. I, as political ecology, take this approach, look at emphasis on local structure, issue of justice and particular meaning structure, and look at relation between resource access and violence. When you compare with other approach who look at ethnic violence, like political ethnology, which mostly the political scientists take this approach, you look at a larger or general explanation that ethnic identity can lead to a kind of conflict or separatism or nationalism. So this is where I came from in terms of this research. The data has come from quite a few research that have been done in the past. But basically, I take political ecology approach. I have 5 minutes left. So if you read the papers, so political ecology take a conjuncture or convergence of culture, powers, political economy as analytical starting point and attempt to integrate discourse with historical geography of material practice. That's quote from one of the Howie's works. As I mentioned earlier, that when talking about ethnic identification in northern Thailand, one of the seminal works by Thongchai on ethno-spatial categorizations, which he called a pseudo-ethnic categorization by geography and ecologies. It had nothing to do with inner quality of people or cultural attributes. So you are the author within. So you are in Thailand, but you are treated as the author or authorness. So he retrieved all this document from the Siamese knowledge when, after the reform, they sent the people from Bangkok to be a governor in different provinces in northern Thailand, and these people that describe the local people by using this kind of ethno-spatial categories is, kind of roughly called Khon Pa. I mean, people who live in the forest, or Chao Ban Nok, those other people in the rural areas. So this kind of stereotype is persistent until now, lead to stereotyping people and subject them to discriminatory practice, like he try with the way they're doing shifting cultivation, the Hmong, the way they produce cabbage, we call Hmong cabbage, or Hmong has been, in fact, in many writing is called forest destroyer and Korean as forest guardians. So I don't have time to go into the detail, but I used 3 cases that try to characterize this ethnic minority according to the distance that they live from the center of the city or the center of the power, and the far away they live, there has become really less Thai, or has been stereotyped or condemned as kind of authors, right? So Thai Lu, Lao Puan, and Kamu. I borrowed this kind of phrase from one of the scholars that we work in that project. He used this term to describe what happened in China and called the process of Hansification, right? So this is a process of Thaiization. So Lu is almost Thai. He's just almost there. Lao Puan is a little bit further, but still close to. But Kamu is far away. So this kind of ethnic categorization later on has played a part in ethnic conflict involving resource structure in northern Thailand. I don't have time to discuss this, but I put this as a history of northern Thailand, the way that the ancient state has been formed before the modern nation state has been established in under the name of Siam. The kind of the political system in northern Thailand, that the center or the Vieng or the town is the center of the power. And the distance that far away from the city is become less Thai, become less civilized. And forest is a kind of identified as uncivilized, illegal, illicit. So people who live in the forest is not Thai, right? It's un-Thai, it's uncivilized. The same in the belief, the Muang garden spirits versus the forest, the devil spirit. So in this case, the forest act as an arena of resort contest and ethnic violence because people live in the forest. Okay. My conclusion is that the conflict that I described in the paper is involved about Thainess and otherness. And history and geography of ethnic identifications play a part and still persist in modern Thailand. And another issue is the rise of orthodox environmental science and environmentalism, or what the previous paper called environmentalism as usual, that has been used for political purpose of the people in power, that they benefit from this kind of pseudoscience or a kind of scientism. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Right. So the last input is going to be about the relation. What is the relation between political ecology and transdisciplinary research? And I would argue that transdisciplinarity is a good way of solving the problem of practice in political ecology, and that political ecology is a good way of solving the problem of apolitical research, which is actually quite dominant in transdisciplinary research. Yeah. So I don't know who, if someone read the article by Loftus, who's talking about the problem of political ecology in practice. So he was basically asking himself, how political is political ecology if it is just restricted to a kind of critical analysis in an academic sense? So how can it be political if it's not connected to making a difference, to changing the situation? And I think, obviously with the transdisciplinary approach, we can solve that problem quite quickly, because that already has this objective of changing reality within the whole approach. Yeah? But in the other direction, if we say, okay, we want to change something, then we need some kind of analysis of causes, and we need some kind of analysis of how to change society. And if you look at a lot of the transdisciplinary work, it's coming from a more kind of earth science, natural science perspective. And they've basically under-theorized the social. So if you look at the 3 articles that we uploaded, they're always talking in a very generic sense about society, humans, or stakeholders. And using stakeholders, for example, it's actually a concept that came out of corporate social responsibility. It's a very, very shallow way of looking at social structure. Yeah. So I would say that a lot of the transdisciplinary stuff at the moment is sort of ignoring 200 years of social theory, and particularly ignoring theory about the social relations of nature. And you can see that in this debate. I think Carl mentioned it, the Anthropocene and the Capitalocene. So the Anthropocene is basically saying it's humans Yeah, and the Capitalocene camp is basically saying it's to do with a particular historical social relations of production connected to capital accumulation, and we have to analyze how that is connected to environmental crisis. So I think political ecology is a fairly easy way to kind of rectify that problem. So I mean, just by using the categories that are used in political ecology, they're talking about political economy, about class, about power and the state, about gender, about conflicts, politicization, social movements, etc. So these are all very helpful, categories to actually analyze the social structures that we're talking about. If we then apply that to the stakeholder idea in transdisciplinary research, we very quickly see that this is actually not a very useful way of going about it. It sort of suggests that we're all in this together. It's kind of like a power-free, equal playing field, level playing field, and the approach is basically let's get everyone together, and if we all talk about it, then that's how we're going to solve the problem, because we all have the same kind of objective. But if we look at the texts that we've been discussing in political ecology, for example, we had that one text about water grabbing in the Mekong. There, quickly you see that these different actors are not just, that they have very different interests, they have very different levels of power, etc., and they are in relation, in a contradictory relation to each other. So there was that one example with how EGAT, is kind of expanding into the region. This is, of course, then connected to the fact that we have a military government in Thailand. Another act is the state bureaucratic capitalist government of Laos, the dam building corporations, etc. Then you have all these other different groups of actors like farmers or the NGOs or grassroots movements, etc. And all this is, of course, highly gendered. So there's no point, it doesn't really lead very far if we just say, let's get the stakeholders together. Yeah? Actually, change does not just happen by people coming together, but it actually happens by contradiction, by struggle, by these interests and discourses kind of, clashing. Just to give some examples for that in a concrete context, I was involved in a research project on the political ecology of the Kapuas River in Indonesia, and it was a kind of action research project. So we were looking to work together with people to change something. And the first example was in the palm oil context. We were working together with a movement of farmers whose land had been grabbed, and we worked in this one area where palm oil had been established. But the problem was that actually the people we were working with were very marginalized. They were in opposition to palm oil, but actually the village head and most of the villagers there had accepted the palm oil project. So, and the people we were working with were then put into jail because they had started to reoccupy their land. This just points to the fact that you can't just say, okay, we're working with the villagers. So villages is not really a social category, it's just a kind of spatial category. Yeah? So you have to look at the way class operates in that local context as well. The second example was we had one group in the lakes where they were developing ecotourism, and this was highly gendered. So actually, the women were mainly involved in fishery activities, and and certain men were controlling the ecotourism industry. The women were doing all the work for the ecotourism industry, so they were doing all the cooking and the cleaning and the washing and all that kind of thing. But they didn't have any say in how this ecotourism stuff was going down. And they were actually stopped from participating in the sort of generalized workshop. This is another example how even in these local structures, gender is a very power overlaid kind of structure. Third example was in a bauxite mining area where we worked with people who were trying to get this bauxite concession revoked. And this actually worked quite well because we used a drone to counter-map the area. And with this information, this was actually co-produced knowledge, the village actually was the kind of the adat structure of the village. They were able to use this information in the court and got the concession revoked. Okay, why am I talking about these three examples? Especially in each example, we had to think very, very carefully about who we wanted to work together with, who were we going to design the transdisciplinary research with. We couldn't just go there and say, we're going to talk to the villagers. Yeah? So you need some kind of analysis of the structures in that place before you actually start developing a transdisciplinary approach. Okay, so the upshot of all this is basically to say, firstly, and this is perhaps what you might want to start discussing in your field research groups. The first thing you need to think about is what phase is the research at in your particular site. So are you in phase A? This is drawing on the Lang article. So at the beginning, where you can start developing a collaborative problem framing and collaborative research team? Or is the research already ongoing by colleagues from Chiang Mai University? So are you in the middle of it? Are you already co-creating knowledge? Or are you already in phase C, i.e. the research has already basically been done and now it's a question of applying it and reflecting on the application? Okay, so that's the first sort of question. The second point would be that we need to have some kind of more systematic actor mapping approach to basically decide with whom are we going to work with. So I think some of these categories from political ecology can help us do that. You know, so I mean, what is the political economy of the site we're looking at? What are the class structures? What are the gender structures? Power? What are the conflicts, etc., etc. And on that basis, then I think it's actually a political decision ultimately with whom we want to work with, and on this basis, then at some point, if we're sort of working as a research team, Christoph mentioned it yesterday, the sort of the collaborative team research kind of idea. What is our team? What are our kind of political assumptions? How do we analyze what we're looking at? And what are our kind of objectives in the research? So this is also connected to this co-production. Co-production doesn't just mean we go and interview the locals, but actually we're already intervening into the field, I'm saying. So, and either we do it without reflecting on it, or we reflect on it and do it in a sort of explicit way. Okay, so once we've sort of thought about that, then and decided with whom we want to work together in a transdisciplinary way, then I think it makes sense to develop a kind of stakeholder strategy. So, if you say, right, we're going to work with we're basically going to work with the women fishermen, fisherwomen or something, yeah? Then of course you can't then just ignore all the other stakeholders, but you're going to have a much more kind of interventionist approach to how to include these other stakeholders. So you might, there might be a phase in the project where you're going to engage with, for example, state officials, but you're going to do it in a reflected interventionist kind of way and not in a apolitical, managerial way. Yeah, that's the point. Thanks. Right.